The following program is sponsored by the Today's Home Remodeler television network.
Welcome to a special edition of Today's Home Remodeler. I'm Stuart Keith, and in this show, we'll be taking a closer look at an environmental challenge we're facing that affects all of us here in Dane County, and that is too much salt getting into our freshwater ecosystems. Now we'll begin with Kathy Lake from the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District, who will share with us some of the challenges they're facing as too much chloride from water softeners is coming into and being discharged out of their treatment facility. She'll also discuss what it could mean if we don't meet this challenge and reduce these levels. We'll then visit the Plumbers 75 Training Center, where we'll catch up with instructor Bob Lanphear, who'll teach us more about water softeners, how they operate, and what we can all do to minimize the total amount of salt they're using. So let's get started with Kathy Lake. Kathy, it's great to have you on the show again. It wasn't too long ago we were out here and we did a complete walkthrough, but we didn't make it into this structure. What's going on here?
Well, thanks for coming out again. It's really nice to have you. This is our ultraviolet light and our effluent pump house. What you're looking at here is our disinfection system.
Sure, when we were just over there, you're looking at the ultraviolet light. It's really cool. It adds a sense of security in my mind that this really is clean water when it leaves. And this is unique. I mean, have you been using ultraviolet light as the final cleaning stage for a long time?
So we've had disinfection here, but before the 1980s, we used a chlorination dechlorination system, and then we replaced those chemicals with the ultraviolet light in the 80s. We've upgraded that system one time, but it does a remarkable job.
For our viewers that don't understand this process, let's quickly recap how wastewater is brought into the MMSD treatment plant, passes through, gets clean, and returns safely back into the environment.
Every day you and I use a bunch of water, and sometimes it goes down the drain and we just think it goes away. But in our area here, it comes to this treatment plant and it comes by pipes. When it gets here, we screen out what we can screen out of it, and then we remove any grit. Then we send it through a primary treatment where we let whatever will float, whatever will sink, and we take that and make fertilizer out of it. And then it moves on to the second stage, our biological treatment system. And in those biological treatment tanks, microorganisms do the work.
And it's really amazing, those microorganisms, they're live creatures that are cleaning the water for us.
Exactly. This plant is doing what nature would do. We just are speeding it up because we have so much water and we need to get it back into the freshwater environment safely. After it leaves that secondary treatment, it moves into the third stage, which is our final clarifiers. And the final clarifiers work to separate the microorganisms from the clean water. That clean water then comes here so that it's disinfected, and then it's ready to be released back into freshwater streams.
So over in this section of the building, we're on the other side of the wall from the UV treatment. Are these the pipes where the clean water is being discharged safely to the environment?
Exactly. These large pumps you see are drawing water from that trough we saw, and these pumps are pumping the water about 10 miles south to a freshwater stream.
Okay, and as clean as this water is, there are still some impurities that we can't see, and that's really the focus of today's show. One of those impurities is very detrimental to our environment, and that's salt, and we have too much salt in our water.
Exactly. Every day we receive about 200,000 pounds of salt.
Oh my gosh.
And that salt dissolves in water. A lot of times we think it goes away, but it actually doesn't go away, and it's harmful to the freshwater environment where this water goes.
Okay, so how did you guys discover this problem?
So we're regulated under the Federal Clean Water Act, and one of those limits we need to meet is chloride. and we can't meet that limit. We get too much salt here right now to meet the limit.
Okay, before we get into a solution and the cost, let's touch on the environmental aspect. I mean, what's going to happen here in Dane County if we don't reduce the amount of salt that we're releasing into the environment?
Well, we're really lucky to have freshwater resources here, and the more salt we put in to those freshwater resources, the more saline they become and the less conducive they are to freshwater organisms.
And so really, even though they're microorganisms on up to maybe small fish, and larger fish for that matter, it can affect the whole ecosystem out there if we don't tackle and address this problem.
And that's why we are regulated and why the Clean Water Act cares about this.
Okay, so where is all this salt coming from?
Well, at the wastewater plant, the majority of the salt we get is from water softeners.
You mean a home water softener, the one I have down in my basement?
Exactly. So homes and businesses, we have hard water here, we soften it, but every bag of salt that you put in your softener actually is going directly into a freshwater stream.
Really? Oh, I guess you're right, because it's being dissolved into the brine. It comes down here, and you can't get rid of it with this system. Nobody can. So really, we're all part of the problem.
Exactly.
If we have a water softener in our homes, which a lot of us do, as ratepayers, that's ultimately going to cost us, because what are the solutions to this?
So if we can't reduce how much salt is coming to the plant, we would have to treat to remove it. And that treatment would be either treating the entire drinking water supply that's coming here or adding a desalination type process at the end of our wastewater treatment process, and that could cost upwards of $500 million to over $2 billion.
Wow, $2 billion to build a desalination plant. And when somebody might hear that and say, oh, that's going to be on MMSD. Well, if you say it's on MMSD, it's on all of us ratepayers that are contributing to the problem. So as a homeowner, I just use my water softener. It can't be that big a deal. Yeah, you think you're a small part of the problem, but you could be a big part to the solution?
Oh, I appreciate this opportunity. So yes, if you have a water softener and you're using more than one bag of salt a month, definitely get a professional in to look at that softener, because there's a lot of things you can do. If it's an older unit, you might be able to replace it with a new upgraded unit that could use significantly less salt. You can also look at things like a blending valve, which is just a valve that's attached to the softener, which could actually reduce your salt use. You might not even notice a difference in your home. And there's also a lot of emerging technologies and some that don't even use salt.
Well, those are great suggestions out there. And what I'm hearing there is don't be afraid to contact your professional plumber. Tell them what your concerns are, have them come out, kind of review your system and give you suggestions and point you in the right direction so you can do your small part to be a big part of the solution. Thank you so much for coming on and getting this message out there.
We really appreciate you being out here. Thank you.
Bob, it's great to see you again. And earlier in the show, we were out at Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District looking at their fabulous facility and what a great job they do at cleaning our water, all the wastewater from local communities going down there. And as clean as that water is, there are still some impurities that they can't remove with that process. And one of them is salt, which is super detrimental to our environment. And so we wanted to catch up with you to learn more about water softeners, because as I understand it, their biggest source of salt comes from a residential home softener.
Right, and to reduce salt with your water softeners, the best way to do that is to make sure that that system is running at the peak best performance you can. And you also need to make sure that what that softener is doing is softening that water for whatever the level of hardness that's out there.
Okay, so it seems to me we need to know how hard is our water at each of our homes? And does that vary between Madison and Middleton or outer Dane County? I mean, does it vary address to address?
It does vary address to address. So each house inside Madison that's on the MMSD municipality system could be pulling water from multiple different wells. And a great resource to understand how hard that water is through their website, where you can drop in your address and you can find exactly the average hardness of the water that's there.
That's great if I'm within their system, but what happens if I live out in the country, I'm on my own well? How do I determine hardness?
That's when you're going to go ahead and do an on-site test, something very similar to what we have here, where you'll gather water from an untreated source, so it's raw, hard water. Then what we'll do is we'll use this hardness kit with a hardness activator and use a sample of the water and count the amount of drops that we use with this, and that tells us our grains of hardness that we have in our water.
Okay, let's walk through this test.
Okay. As I said before, I already collected a sample of our hard water. I have a hardness indicator packet here. This is part of the chemical process that goes into it. Now that I have that mixed in, you see the base color that we're at.
Sure, it's really a bright pink.
Right. So now as I go and I add my drops to this and I count my drops, it's going to go from that pink color to a blue color. And the amount of drops is going to equal the amount of hardness that water is. So there you have it, 26 drops.
So 26 drops equates to 26 grains of hardness in this particular sample. And look at how blue that turned. Okay, and so once we determine how hard our water is, and if we want a water softener, let's say we have one in our house, we want to minimize the amount of salt we're using. Does it matter what model you have?
It does matter what model that we have. The newer ones that are out there are better at managing the amount of salt that is used and the amount of water that flows through it. Whereas the older ones are just set and regimented on the amount of water that flows through it. Okay. I do have some models in here that we can take a look at to give you a better understanding.
Sounds good. Oh, right over here, this is awesome. You know, this is one of the reasons why I love coming out to the training center. This has to be fantastic for plumbers for continuing education, to come out and see all the different models you have here and to teach on.
We do a lot of good stuff with continuing education, as well as we also train our new apprentices what's out there for the technologies and also the old units that you see a lot.
Sure. Well, obviously the more knowledgeable they are before they go out, the more efficient they are on site. Now this one, they look very similar, just different colors, and this one's a lot dirtier, so probably a lot older.
This one is very old. This one obviously you can tell has been beat up and it had a good life. This is a newer model, but at the same point it is the same technology that is being used from the head up.
Okay, so as a homeowner, I should first of all go down and identify what I have. So come down, take a look at it, and there's a number of different models, so they might look different. Is there a way to know how old my system is?
If you're not sure how old your system is, one quick rule that you can go ahead and consider is how long have you been in that house? Okay, if you've been in that house for 15 years and it's the same water softener that's been in there, it's time to update and get a new one.
So there is a life expectancy to these units? I mean, how long can I expect it to last?
Usually in our area, water softeners can last anywhere between 15 to 20 years, but it all depends on the quality of water that you have coming into it.
Okay, so when we're talking about setting the efficiency of these, we're talking about the head itself, right? Not so much the resin bed inside here.
Right. The heads have progressed over the years. If you look from the neck down, pretty much that tank and the resin and the media They're all the exact same.
Okay, so I come downstairs, I look, I have a model like this. How are they set, or, how are these actually differing? Like this one's digital actually, compared to this one that looks really ancient.
This one is the biggest red flag in plumbing right here. So this works just solely on time. So as this head works, we have to go ahead and set a few points on here when it does operate it, when it doesn't operate. Oh, yeah. This is our new style that we have out here. This is a newer clack head. This does have time involved with it, but it meters the water and it gives us a lot more functional usage of how much water I use and how much salt and brine gets used into the system.
So really what you're saying is upgrading isn't just for the environment. I mean, you're going to have a return on investment because you're going to be saving on salt, water usage, and lugging those heavy bags downstairs.
Oh, huge savings. This system right here, if it's not set correctly or if it's outdated and plugged up, you could be burning through salt left and right. Whereas this one, once you get it calibrated and set where you're at, you could use 40 pounds of salt a month or less, depending on how well you can calibrate it.
Wow. Okay, so once I determine what I have, can we talk about the operation, the different components that are there, and that noise I hear at 2:30 in the morning, what the heck's going on down there?
Definitely. Let's go over to our unit that we have installed, and I'm going to show you just a few functions that are on there that you, the homeowner, should get familiar with.
Okay, Bob, now let's walk through the different components and how a system operates.
Yeah, Stu, let's just go ahead and look at it. Right here, we have the brine tank, okay? In this brine tank, obviously we have our salt, and then we have a tube right here that has a fill valve to it, where as this system works through, it sends water into it, okay?
Okay.
Then we have our media bed right here. For the most part, all media beds are very similar. We've looked at that and we talked about that in the other ones.
And I can actually see it down here. It ends right about here. So it's not totally filled up.
Right.
It's right about here.
Yeah, you can see right there when I shine that flashlight behind it.
Sure.
We have this open space with the water, and then our media is right in here. And then when it goes through the process of cleaning that and rinsing it off, that actually gets fluffed up and it kind of brings itself higher.
Okay, so how does the system actually soften water?
So we have a supply side right here where the water comes into the unit. The water goes through the media bed, okay? All those minerals come in contact with that media bed and they get attracted and they stay in that media bed.
And so that's what's pulling out the calcium, magnesium, the different hard water minerals?
Exactly.
And those stay on the media?
Those stay on the media bed, and then after a certain point in time, we need to wash those off. That's where that salt comes into play. Then the softened water comes through the center tube in this, and then we have clean water out to the house.
Okay.
Now when we want to go ahead and clean that media bed, what happens is we have water that is initially sent down in through to the tube, in through that fill valve again that we had right in here. It fills up and it saturates that with that salt.
So you're creating a salt brine, essentially?
Yes, that salt brine is going to go in its process. It'll get sucked back into the media bed, and that's where it strips and cleans off all that minerals off of that media bed in there, and then it gets taken out through our waste line in here, down out into the MSD system.
Okay, and so that's where the issues are arising for MMSD and really us as a whole. All that salt brine has to go somewhere. It goes down to MMSD, and right now we don't have the technology that they're using anyways to rid our water of that salt. I mean, that would take a desalination plant. And so if we can minimize the amount of salt brine that's being put into the system, that's going to help everybody out.
Right. When the plumber comes in and installs these or works on these, they can set all the parts and pieces to this so that it's using the least amount of salt to get the best quality water out to the consumer.
Again, another great example of don't be afraid to contact a professional plumber and get these systems set so they're optimized for minimal salt usage. Now, when I see this can be intimidating to somebody. You go downstairs and, ooh, yeah, all that I ever do is I just hit it and see what it, how many gallons are left.
Right.
But aside from that, I'm calling a plumber.
And that's perfectly fine, but let's talk about what some of the stuff here does. Obviously, we have the set clock. The plumber initially will set this up so it goes through its cleaning and regen process at about 2 a.m. If we don't have our clock set at the right time, it could throw you off when you hear that system go.
Sure.
So I want to just go and hold and set clock right there. I'll press that button in, and then I can just use the up and down at each point for the hour. I'll hit next to get to the minute, and I can go ahead and adjust to make sure that that time is set correctly.
Sure.
As you said, you can hit the next button, and that says how many gallons are remaining. So what that means is this unit can clean and grab that water for 817 gallons.
Yeah, sometimes we'll be taking a shower or something and it's like, hey, is our softener working? Well, we go down and check and there's 17 gallons left, that's it. So I know that it's nearing the end of its cycle when it needs to rejuvenate itself.
Right. So now you'll see that the word softening is popping up in the left top corner. That means water is flowing through that meter and it's going ahead and pulling away. If we let that sink run for quite some time, we hit that next again, look, lo and behold, we're down a gallon of water available to us.
And so that's cool. So when you're looking at it, don't be intimidated by this. Feel free to set your clock, check how many gallons you have left before it recycles. But then beyond that, it's probably not a bad idea to contact a professional plumber if you want to make sure it's set up properly.
Correct.
Well, we saw how a water softening system operates. It begs the question, does my entire house need to be connected to it?
No, it doesn't need to be connected to it. It all depends on the person's preference of what they want softened. For myself, I only have my hot water softened at my house. You have to look at other fixtures that are in your house to make sure that you're not spending the money to soften that water, like outside hose bibs. Another good one is your kitchen sink faucet, because most of the time people are going to go and grab a cup of water out of that kitchen sink faucet.
Sure, and they probably don't want softened water to drink.
Right. And there's other times where somebody may come in or just purchase a home and that entire house is plumbed to soft water.
Sure, what happens in that case?
There is a way that a plumber can go in and evaluate it, and they could possibly change the piping systems. But a simpler way to do it is to install a blending valve like we have right here on the back of the softener. So this blending valve is a piece that just gets mounted right to that softener, and what it does is it will send a little bit of hard water right into the soften line. If I wanted to, I can install this and adjust it so that I can have a hardness maybe around 7 or a little bit less, which is still considered soft water.
Oh, I have some friends from Chicago, and their water I think is around 7 or 8. And sometimes I find it kind of funny, but they're like, the water here, it's almost slippery on my skin. I mean, not used to that. Almost like they don't like it. They would like it to be a little bit harder. So this would be a great example of something that they could install or have a plumber install and put it at about 7 or 8.
Right. I mean, you're still getting the benefits of what that soft water can do for the system, and you're adding just a little bit of hardness into it so that it's still just a good quality water that you can have throughout your house.
Okay, so as we talk about emerging technologies, I know Kathy earlier in the show we were talking about different options to help condition the water, but they don't involve salt per se. So do you have any examples of those?
We do. In our lab, we have 2 setups plumbed in place right here. Now these are a salt-free water conditioning system. What this does is this conditions the water. As the water flows through this system, through these media beds, it's going to change the properties of how that mineral within that water is. It's going to encapsulate it almost. And then when it gets to that encapsulation point, it will pass through the piping and your plumbing so that it doesn't attach and adhere to the plumbing, and it will flow out the drain.
Okay, so this is a great example of emerging technologies, because one of the reasons you have a softener is to protect your high-end fixtures, right? Your faucets or some of your appliances out there that could potentially get gummed up, corroded, get encrusted in those minerals. You're saying this isn't technically softening the water, but it's encapsulating and conditioning the hard minerals so that you're going to get extended life on those fixtures.
Right. That mineral is still going to be within the water, but we're going to make it so that it doesn't attach itself inside the metallic or plastic parts on the inside and send it out to the drain.
Sure.
So this system right here is good for about 1 million gallons of water can flow through this, and then it's time to change it out. When you have your plumber come in and install it, they'll install it with a set of unions on through here, and they'll be able to shut down the system and replace it and change it out after 1 million gallons, which is about 10 years of use.
And it ties in perfectly with the show, because this is a great example of how you're not using salt and creating a salt brine, yet you're conditioning the water. And that salt brine in the traditional systems gets sent down to MMSD. They can't remove that, so that gets discharged back into the environment. And as we've all learned, salt in our water is detrimental. We all do our part. A little bit goes a long ways in saving our greatest asset, our fresh water. Thanks for coming on today's show.
Thanks, Stu.
The preceding program was sponsored by the Today's Home Remodeler television network.